Welcome to this webinar, which I'm hosting together with Elative. They invited me as a senior manager within the human capital management for a company called HerbertNathan Co. My native language is Swedish, so if you hear some Swinglish or something you don't understand, you know why. And you can always ask a question in the chat room, and we'll make sure to answer it at the end of the webinar. So welcome. Engaged people build successful organizations. I'm going to be sharing some statistics with you guys, some facts regarding what employee engagement actually does. But before that, just shortly, who's the sender? Who's HerbertNathan Company? So, right. We are a management consultants specialized within digitalization, and we have especially experts within the system market, either with strategy of your digitalization, procurement, and implementation of the whole package. We do this by being an independent advisor. We don't get any kickbacks from different type of system suppliers. We only look at what the customer actually have for needs and what system might be a suitable fit towards that strategy. We have a proven methodology of doing this. My colleagues on the ERP side have been doing this for 20 years in the ERP world, but the strategies of procurement or transforming your business through digitalization is exactly the same. So for me, which works in the human capital management area, HR system, workforce management, salary, payroll, all of those systems, I use the same methodology, and it's a good success. We have the market knowledge. We scan the market, we write reports, we do market analysis assignments for our customers, but also for different vendors that are looking for client needs, for example. We try to be as flexible as we can and fit every type of customers. We have on the public side, but we also have businesses in the private sector. We work through experienced consultants. All of us have at least 20 years of either being an expert within the area or coming from management consulting firms as PwC, KPMG, and those. And we have a lot of different customers. So that's us. Enough about me or HerbertNathan. Now we'll start talking about what the impact, the business impact, not only that's the impact the work has on the employees, but what can you actually gain as a business working with your engagement. Fact one, engagement drives growth. And this is statistically proven both within Swedish companies, Nordic companies, all over the world, that actually, if you take the Swedish growth index in this case, together with the organization's level of engagement, like how engaged are the employees, you're going to see something interesting. If you have bored employees, you are less likely to actually grow, to make a net profit on your business. But if you have engaged employees and a high number of those, you will also see that you have a higher growth. So employee engagement drives growth. And actually 8.6, this research shown in this case. So that's a fact. Fact two is that engaged employees also makes the customers happy. And this is especially, I used to work in the customer service industry, and we spent so much time with the employees, making sure that they were coached and taken care of. And that really made an effect on the customers. So already back then, this was about 10 years ago, I could see that trend. But now it's also seen in the research as being engaged. So you have the customer satisfaction on one side, you have the unengaged employees in one, and the other one is the engaged employees. And as you can see, you double up your customer satisfaction by having engaged employees. So if you're running a customer service department or really just having customers, which most of us have, this will really make an impact. Not only a fact, but actually research done by a man named Bernard, I'm going to give you the link to him as well, has shown once again, then on a global level of, I think it was around 500 companies, you see a higher growth when you have higher employee engagement. It also so there was a bigger profit, a larger profit margin on the baseline. So number 2. And number 3, there was also an increased productivity. Benjamin Snyder, he read and interviewed about these 500 companies and also looked at especially the employee engagement towards this. So if you were uncertain before, okay, what does the employee engagement actually do? You can take the numbers of the statistically proven and actually start doing your business case. What happens if you would actually raise, for example, your growth index by 8.6%? Here are more numbers, actually globally, but looking at the employee engagement, that 2 of the 3rd of the global workforce, they're not engaged. The researchers in this case study, they estimated that there was a productivity gap of 60 to 8 billion euros just by having not a workforce that are not engaged. Also, no matter what you do, 80% of the organization's marketable capital is in the intangible assets. It's actually in the humans, in the competence, how we do business, how we do our processes, for example. And there you also see a big gap, that 52% gap in operating income between the company with the most engaged employees and the board ones. So 52% gap. They're also likely, if you have engaged employees, to recommend your product and services. This case study showed that 70% of the engaged employees are promoters of your business, of your organization, are speaking well of you as an employer, but also speaking well about the brand and the product you're creating, versus 13% of disengaged employees. So if you're looking to improve your employer brand, this is one of the best things. Also, they looked at, okay, how many employees leave the organization and what mode are they in? So if you are disengaged, if you have a pulse survey or whatever that shows that you are disengaged, it's 80% more chance that you leave. And then you can calculate the costs of losing someone. You're having to do the recruitment, you need to do the training again. There's also a lot of numbers in those. And last but not least, they saw a difference between the engaged employees and the board employees in absence days. 2.69 days a year on average for someone that is engaged in their work. For a disengaged employee, you see 6.19 days on average. So if you take your salary cost and the absence cost, you can calculate, okay, what does that difference mean if we move up? Now we talked about, okay, what happens when you start having a good engaged workforce? But what actually affects the employee engagement then? Okay, we can talk about it as a statistic, engaged employees are good, but what contributes to the employees being engaged? First one, leadership. It's shown in all kinds of studies, really. The reason why you leave your job is because of your manager, usually. When you don't have a good leader close to you, that's a reason to leave. So it's also a factor not only for engagement, it's also a factor for actually keeping someone. But especially if you have a bad manager, can you be engaged in your work? I don't know. It's hard. The research at least show it's not statistically proven, but it's almost impossible to be engaged if you don't have a good manager that you feel that you can cooperate. The next thing is the well-being. Of course, my personal well-being, depending on if I'm feeling sick or not, but also the well-being at work, the environment, how many conflicts, how are the colleagues, and so on. Which also brings us into cooperation. If my cooperation with my colleagues not working, you can't be engaged, because that's also the second reason why you leave your job. First one, bad manager. Second one is not good colleagues. Then you also tend to look for a new job. So exactly the same here. When the cooperation in the team works, it's also easier to be engaged. Confirmation or validation, whatever you can call it, but asking to be seen as an individual, that someone notices when I'm having a good day and I'm doing a lot, for example. Pride. You need to take pride in your work to be able to be engaged. If you're not proud of what you're actually delivering, it's hard to be engaged in the activity as well. And development. To actually be engaged and be curious and be passionate about something also needs that you actually move, you change, you develop, you find new things, you keep being entertained and curious about where you're going. That's how you also get engaged. And last but not least, a sense of purpose, especially maybe for the generations that's coming now, that really needs to feel like the sense of purpose of me or how I look at the world also needs to co-align with what my organization is doing. If I don't know actually what I'm doing in the bigger picture, it's also hard to be engaged. The one I want to talk to you a little bit more about, that's maybe the first and foremost, because as we said, it's the number one reason why people don't like their jobs today, is really the leadership. Especially if you're working with HR, that's usually your vessel to get your strategies out on the different HR matters and processes and the strategies that the managers should prefer. So it's through the leadership that you can affect really the employee engagement. As a leader then, what do you need to do to actually engage the employees then and fill all the boxes of what they need to do? I would say there's a few tips that's really standing out as the top priority. And one, as a leader, is to provide a clear direction for the organization. If people don't know where they're going in the long run, if they don't know why they're doing something, they're not going to get engaged. You also need to really effectively communicate what the organization is trying to achieve, not only make money or provide a service for clients or whatever. What are you really trying to achieve as a team? Without communication, there can be no engagement. You know, it is with an old friend that you never speak of or never hear from. You sooner or later you start feeling disengaged from the friend because you never speak. Exactly the same with the organizations. You also need to ensure as a leader that their service attitudes floods in the organization. When organizations start to say, no, we can't do that, or we're not really, I can't be bothered to help you, I don't have the time, for example, then you have a problem because people are not engaged at that second. So you need to always ensure that you really are a team and that the service is not only for the customers, but also internally. And also make changes necessary to compete effectively. If you need your employees to be engaged, also the organization needs to be engaged into transforming and changing itself after how the world looks. So that's the best tip for leaders, really, if you want to raise the employee engagement. And how can HR then help the leaders provide this? We can separate first the employee engagement, which is the emotional connection which the employees actually feel about the organization. You know, if you ever had been in a spot where you maybe didn't fit in, you had an employee that you really didn't like. Sometimes when you walk past the old office, only the logo can make you a bit, you remember, it creates an emotion within it. That's the engagement. HR can look at the employee experience. Because it's really all, if you look at all the interactions between the organization and the employee, you find all the different stuff that affects the employee engagement. So employee experience is a tool to use to help with the employee engagement. So we're talking about two things, but they're really quite similar. But just remember, the employee experience is the tool to identify how you can raise the employee engagement moving forward. The purpose of working with employee experience is to create meaningful experiences for the employees by influencing them at certain points. And we're going to get back to this, but this is the whole purpose when you have an employee experience managers. They're quite, they're more regular now, and I think they're coming a lot more. The sole purpose of such a role within organization is just to look for experiences and try to influence them somehow. And how do you do this then? Okay, now we know we have the employee engagement. We need to work on that to gain the extra profit, to drive growth, whatever reasons you have. We will have the employee experience in our toolbox. And by mapping, so we look internal, okay, how does the employee experience work in our organization? And most employee experiences today, or EX, are digital. Most of the employees come in contact with you as an employer or organization the first time digitally. It's by an ad or spontaneous applications, whatever, but it's digital, most of it. Then we still have some analog process as well, difficult conversations, salary negotiations, whatever it can be, where people need to meet. And that is one part of the employee experience as well. But today we're going to be focusing on just the digital side of it. The different perspectives on the employee experience. When I meet IT in projects, okay, we're going to be looking to buy a system that raises the employee engagement, and we start talking about EX, they usually see it as the end user experience, like the user ability in the system. How easy is it to draw a report? How easy is it to change address in it, for example? The HR perspective on it is the commitment to work. Okay, how do we affect the employees' commitment to work during different phases? And I don't hope I offend any IT now if you represent them, but when you're working with employee engagement, you can forget about the user experience. It's a little part of it. Okay, if I get an old system, it doesn't work and it's not loading correctly, for example, it's going to affect my motivation that day at work, I promise you. Reseräkningar, for example, it drives my head in. But now, when we're looking for employee engagement, we're looking for the commitment to work. There are different types of employee experience that you could be looking at. And the first one is the professional side. Okay, what happens in the onboarding process when the employee actually signed the contract, for example? Or what happens in the pre-boarding? Or what happens in the first interview with the managers? All those are touch points, really, where something happens and we have an interaction with the employee and it's based on a professional communication. Then we also have the personal, on how I feel as an employee the first day, for example, when I go into my office. Are all my colleagues there? They say hi, they show me around, I feel welcome, for example, or has my manager actually forgotten that was my first starting day? So that's actually a professional process that affected my personal employee experience. Then we also have the emotional, where we actually create feelings in the employee. For example, when I get feedback from my manager, that I'm not agreeing with, or I feel a bit threatened because it's actually right. That is the part of the emotional employee experience. So when you look at the onboarding process, you need to look for these type of difference. Really. Okay, what is the professional? What's the contract? Okay, how does the contract look? Is it digital? Is it easy to sign? The personal aspect, okay, how are we greeting them the first day? How are the manager communicating with them before they actually have their first day? And then the emotional, okay, what do we need to consider on the first day if you don't know how to get in? For example, it's a big building, maybe you feel a bit lost if you're 20 and it's your first job. Those types of experiences. When you sit there and you have, okay, onboarding life cycle of an employee, and it feels, oh God, what are we going to be looking for then? What are the pain points of our employee experience? Where do the employees get disengaged and leave? You can look at the touching points. And for the work side, like we have two different spheres. One is work. We have colleagues, clients, and leaders. They affect or interact with me somehow and affect my experience throughout the day. You also have my competence and my development. If I feel like that I'm growing, that my competence is spreading, for example, or I'm going to the specialist direction, which I always dreamt about. Also, my working environment, is it safe? Is it cold? Is it warm? Those types of interactions really with touching points. And you also have the system and tools. I've seen good managers break from a bad HR system, I can say, that's not designed really for the user experience from the manager side, maybe more designed for HR or for someone else. That can also affect how I feel as an employee, especially if I'm not really managing my change. I have a lot of resistance. There hasn't been any change management with the new HR system, for example. That's going to be a big employee experience, I guarantee. Then you also have the more fluffy, not fluffy, they're quite hardcore when you feel they're not right, but still the values of the organization. Sometimes they affect me when my company express their values either to the public or to us in a meeting. Also, the strategy of the company can also affect me, and the culture. If we have a good culture that actually promotes a good employee engagement, are there a lot of cooperations? Are the team working well, and so on? Then you also have the private sphere, which is not really the organization's responsibility, but it's still something that has touching points within the employee experience, because I bring this in every day to my work. My ambitions, for example, or my family, if I had a huge fight with my husband in the morning before coming in, how engaged am I going to be in my work, for example? Also my health. Have I just gotten some bad news? For example, I might not be the most client friendly, for example. And here's really the leadership, I say, challenge of knowing what your employees are going through. Just trying to make sure that they, through their employee experiences, you also contribute to their individual experience. Commuting might be such a thing, especially here in Stockholm, where trains not working, you can't even get home, or you always get late, for example. How many minutes does it take me to cool down rushing into that meeting, for example, and actually be engaged? My finances, how are they operating, for example, and housing. So all of these. And we also bring the bigger picture with us. Our level of responsibility is usually set in our, like how we see and perceive work, for example, but our values and also our attitude. All of these are touching points that kind of interfere during the workday, but they affect how the employee perceives you. Research has shown, not completely to 100%, I haven't found a report, that organizations that actually tend to take care of the individual part as well, or the private employee experience. For example, Marie, I can see you're not feeling well. Have you had a fight with your husband again? yes, okay, I'll take you off the phone and you can sit and go and minister, for example. Those employees are the ones that later get engaged because they feel it's a give and take. But it's important, it's a give and take. That's a hard thing. But with the flexibility that we're now seeing, it might actually be a good idea to go a little bit further of accommodating the private sphere here to affect the employee experience. Also taken into consideration when you're looking at your processes, okay, what touching points do we have during the different stages? Is also, okay, what do people remember? Because those are the ones that stay within us, and those are the ones that create an emotion. An ordinary day, a Tuesday for me, is not going to create the emotion that I remember what I ate, for example. But if I go into a conversation with my manager and I get a promotion that I wanted for so long that day, I'm going to remember it. So that's a really important touching point then, because I'm going to remember it. And then you see it for happiness. Okay, how happy or sad do we get? Or how irritated and angry? So it's like a fluctuation of emotions. But the more emotion during a time actually makes us remember less. Here you have like a normal day. It's not really a peak. I don't get emotional about anything. It's really just working along, a routine day, I would say. I'm not going to remember what I did the 29th of March. But if something special happens, for example, I get the promotion, I'm going to have a huge peak because I feel happiness. I feel, something has happened. Then you can also go lower as well. If it's a bad experience, you also remember it a lot more. It's in your mind. So the first day at the office, for example, at a new job, that's a peak. You remember it because everything is new. You've been nervous. You've been so happy about actually landing the job. That day we remember. So it tells you when you're designing your processes, okay, let's make sure that the first day for the employees, depending on what your employees' needs are, that we design a day so they really remember it as a good day. This is the peak end rule. It comes from the psychologists really looking at how the brain handles memories. So this is how it works. You can definitely assure it in your work from Anno, peak end rule. Moments that matter, those are the peak end rules. You can say those are the ones that really gets in the brain and we remember. You have the transitions. A transition is when I start my new promotion, for example, I get notified. There's a clear beginning or a before and after. That is a transition. Promotions are usually like that. If you're demoting someone, that's a transition. If you're changing an employee from a team, that's a transition. So something that is formal and you can actually see a before and after. You can also look for milestones. Milestones can be transitions, but only if we let them be. My birthday, for example, nothing happens to me at all if I don't celebrate my birthday. But since it's in our culture that we celebrate birthdays, I make it a milestone. So I want something to happen before and after, but it's not really necessary. When you have my type of job, I have a lot of different projects running at the same time. For example, a milestone for me is when I'm ending a project. I always feel like, okay, hopefully I did a good job for the client, they're satisfied and I can move on. But my manager doesn't have a clue. Maybe the manager then in that case should actually celebrate the milestone with me because it's a good moments that matter for me and I want to remember it well. The last but not least are the bumps. When you get the feedback from your manager that you don't really want to hear, it might be the salary talk when you receive something that you're not completely satisfied with. It might be the notice of leave, for example, something that is, a bump. really. Look for those as well. Those are so important, especially us in HR knows the importance of handling someone with respect during a difficult time. Those are really the moments that matter on how the employee perceives you. So spend some time there as well when you look what you need to improve on your engagement. Okay, if you mapped your whole employee experience journey, you know where you have a problem. The problem is the first day because we never have any computers that work. Usually the managers haven't done the checklist, for example. Yeah, whatever it can be, you identify them. You can start mapping your journey and define your needs. Define the employee experience, first of all, within you, because you have different. You might have temporary workers. For them, the employment with you guys is something completely different for someone that has been working there for 20 years. It might also be a generation. You have a lot of people that might be over 60, for example. They might need a different employee experience than the youth you're hiring during the summer. So define those. You also map the employee journey throughout this. Okay, so you have your temporary workers. They only work in 9 weeks during the year. What do they need to be engaged and want to come back and be productive and conduct to the organization, for example? And then you do the same for the other employee experiences that you have defined. Tip them, look for the moments that matter. It doesn't have to be a workshop for 2 weeks, it can actually be 2 workshops or 1 workshops even, where different people that are involved in the journeys together look for moments that matter. What do you remember about the job you're working today? What are the moments that you remember? It might be an easy practice as that. And then you need to prioritize. You're going to find a lot to do. Usually, oh God, I interviewed new hires, for example, and the manager actually felt a bit shocked on is that how we get perceived? We do all this work before the employment actually starts, but still the judgment of the day is that. So you need to prioritize and you need to really listen to the managers or the leaders because they are going to be doing the engagement afterwards. And then you summarize it in your needs analysis. Doesn't have to be a full report or any research or whatever, but you still need to really summarize, okay, what are the needs that you need? Because it might be a system. Maybe that's where you need to start an HR system, but it might also need to be looking at the managers. Maybe it's the leadership that actually needs. So try to summarize them because the systems aren't going to fix everything. It's the processes working the way you want to work. That's how you fix it. But the system might be a good help sometimes, especially in the digitalization era that we encounter. I'm just leaving you with some example of journey mapping that either my clients or myself have been doing. This was a workshop of 1 day, just a lot of notes, trying to identify, okay, where do we have the problems and where are the strengths and where are the different activities that happens. Then you start moving up the journey expectations we did here. Okay, what are the expectations of us? And also, okay, are we fulfilling those expectations? Yeah, happy and sad numbers. And then also recommendation and outcomes. So it doesn't need to be harder than this. This is something a lot more nicer, and I only borrowed it. This is not mine, I want to say, but I think it's good. This is really a customer journey map, but the customer here is a disabled person that's looking for employment. So here they really mixed, okay, what's happening in the different stages of the employment, what needs do they have, what are their expectations and so on. Something similar a little bit more neater, maybe just from really looking from attraction to leaving the company. So the whole employee journey really, and trying to map, okay, what are the touching points? When do we interact with the employee? And do they remember that interaction? Is it a moment that matters? Yes. Okay. Then you go deep. That was all from me. If you want to know more about either the different systems that's on the market or just read up on some blogs regarding employee experience or engagement, we have Insight, and we also have the publications. Questions, reflections? I got a question here. What is the biggest challenges when it comes to building a positive employee experience? Good one. If I generalize, looking at the clients that I work with on a regular basis, just looking at the employee experience, it's actually just getting the management on board that this is an important topic. It's hard to convince the CEO, for example, that, okay, but if we work on this, if we really put an effort in on the interview or on the first day, maybe invest in actually more tools than we expected, we are going to earn money. That's one of the biggest challenges, I would say. Another question, what are the biggest obstacles in measuring impacts? I would say that some of the numbers that we are using in the business case is it's not hard, valid data. It's actually an instant feeling that I have, for example, with my engagement. Like if I get a pulse survey, for example, which I get every Friday maybe, particularly on that Friday, I had a client yell at me. My manager wasn't in a good mood in the morning. I am not going to put in like a smiley face on that employee engagement. That doesn't mean I'm not going to be engaged in the next Monday, but it's still going to affect. And then you can also, okay, but can we really count home the money then? So I would say that it's really a measurement of emotion that we need to quantify in money. That's the biggest obstacle. Another question. Oh, interesting. I'm writing my thesis about how the company where I'm graduating can improve and arrange their employee journey. Any tips? Any tips on the process or on what you should read up on? You're all getting my slides in the end of the show, so you know that's you. All the referments I made to research, for example, if you want to use that in your thesis, you get it in the presentation. But or else I would say that the company where you're doing your thesis at should really map the employee experience. Try to do the employee journey and actually map it and see, okay, what are we dealing with? Because you can't just buy a tool, for example, and fix it. You need to know what the problems actually are. Three, are there any metrics that are more important than others? Yes, I would say the absolute most important is the engagement on the loyalty, or the engagement, but it's the single most, because you can be happy at work, but if you're not engaged, you're not going to be as productive. You can feel fulfilled at work and have the best colleagues in the world and have the best manager in the world, but if you're not engaged, you're still not 100% productive. So I would say the engagement, and there's different way of measuring the engagement, but usually it's some kind of commitment to doing a good job. Any more questions? Sometimes a question pops up later on. You have my contact details in the presentation. You can always write me a message on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect there. And I'm happy to help, really. This is one of my favorite subjects, really, because it makes such a difference when you have the engaged employees and when you see how HR really can help the business grow and also have the effects on really in the business on a different way by employee engagement. Thank you very much for listening. I hope to see you soon again.